Welcome to the Secret Garden. I'm Alice. I'm a book lover. I read all sorts of books. Fantasy, fairy tale, sci-fi, classics. Classic books are my favorite. I haven't been reading as much as I used to be when I was in school and in uni. Partly was because the books are too expensive in the UK. Well, I was spoiled by the price in China, particularly about books. Even for the same package, everything is much cheaper in China compared to the UK. So every time when I go back to China, my parents already prepared a lot of things for me to take back to the UK. They think books are too heavy. Every time the books have to be given place for other things. So end up to be I cannot get many books back from China. I've been reading on Kindle ever since I came to the UK after university. No, reading Kindle is totally different from having the paper book in your hands. Felt like I read a book in dream. Yes, there are websites you can buy Chinese books from the UK. They really were not that convenient before. Good news. Recently, I found some websites where I can get it from the UK, although with still more expensive price, 10 times or at least 5 times. It's much more convenient at least, rather than in the past I have to arrange my own delivery. Really difficult and not reliable. Because of this change, I finally can start to be a reader again. Yes, you might wonder why don't I read it in English then? Yeah, I forced myself really hard to read in English. I found out that if it's just for information reading, then okay, I can do that in a second language. But for books like novel, poets, where you want to feel the author, you want to feel behind the words, then that's really hard. Sorry, my level of English really is not that level yet. Every time reading was almost a torture to read the classics particularly. You know, they tend to use big words in classics. And so that's really difficult for me, as I am not a native English speaker. I've been so longing the ability to feel the author through the words. That's why I really decided to buy books from China using these websites, although it's still expensive. That's why I got this new bookshelf for my new books here. I'm so thrilled to introduce them. First, these big boys. You might be wondering, what are they? Poems. This one from the Tang Dynasty. Yes, there are millions of poems from the Tang Dynasty, which is more than 1,000 something years ago in China. In fact, through Chinese history, it was always trend to do poems among the educated people all the time, wherever they go. Such like if they go traveling with their friends and they see beautiful scenery and they directly say, oh great, I've got a poem. Oh, they are partying with their friends, drinking, and then suddenly they feel, oh, it's such a great opportunity and we better write poems together. There's a lot of poem-related games among the educated people when they are gathering. Of course, whenever they feel sad, whenever they feel happy, they always write a poem. For that reason, there's just numerous poems out there through the Chinese history, particularly in the Tang Dynasty, because at that time, the economy and everything of the whole China was thriving. A lot of poets existed. This is, of course, a collection of the best. It is big also for it's not just the poem, it is an appreciation dictionary. Analyzing the poem guides you to appreciate it. Why I got it? I just really want to feel the magical words, you know. I do believe that poems are the best among all forms of literature to really feel the feeling, to feel the author through the words. These are also poems, but in different forms. This one is poem from the Song dynasty. What's the difference? Well, Song dynasty is later than the Tang dynasty. The poem has developed into some new forms. Let's compare it. So you can have a look. This one is the Tang dynasty type of poem, and you can see each sentence is limited for the same amount of characters. The position of each character has to be strictly rhyming with other characters on the same position in the next sentence. Not just the rhyming in pronunciation, but even has to match the meaning as well. So kind of quite like the couplets in Chinese culture, which still exist in nowadays. And when it's Chinese New Year for the good wish, it is longer than the couplets, definitely. So it's straighter way of poems, straighter form. There are a lot more limitation in making the Tang dynasty poems. But in the Song dynasty, the poem developed to be, you see, the sentence is not that strictly has to be the same length. Expression is also freer. It's more like lyrics. Many of these poems were song lyrics at that time, but nowadays, unfortunately, we don't know how it was sung at that time. But modern days, people also use these lyrics and make new songs. And I really like that type of songs. It's getting more and more popular in China nowadays. This one is the drama extracts from the Yuan dynasty. At that time, it was when the Mongolians were ruling China. Genghis Khan, his descendants were ruling China at that time. Before the Yuan dynasty, for hundreds of years through Chinese history, there was the talent select system through national exams, which was the hope for many learned people who came from the bottom class to change their class. If they did well in exam, they can directly be given positions in the government. Unfortunately, this system was deserted by the Yuan dynasty, so the learned people at that time were quite lost. Some of them made a living by writing dramas. Most of the audience are even illiterate, quite often from bottom class. It is great that a lot of the dramas from the Yuan dynasty are definitely for those people's taste, writing about their life with their language. But also because of that reason, it wasn't valued and studied as much as the poems through Chinese history for quite a long time, because the language used in the dramas are just not as refined as the poems for the learned people. But nowadays, yes, of course we value the dramas from the Yuan dynasty much more. It is an interesting fact that the Yuan dynasty drama thriving time was almost exactly the same time of Shakespeare. It was interesting thinking that the drama were thriving in China and in the UK around the same time. Many drama lovers love to talk about one of the most famous authors of the Yuan dynasty dramas was called Tang Xianzu, and he died exactly the same year when Shakespeare died. Recently, there's a new drama in China which is really popular that is based on one of the most famous drama from the Yuan dynasty. It is really good. It's called Dream of Splendor. I will definitely make another video to talk about it. Yes, here it is. Here. Again, it's a dictionary to guide people to appreciate it. Yes. Oh, I'm so excited to read all of them. But I'm not reading them in a hurry. Just look at how big it is. The last one of these big boys is the articles from ancient time of China. This is a collection from different books, historical records, and also the literature articles and letters. Guess how much I paid for these big boys? But I just cannot wait any longer. Particularly through the pandemic, I'm so stuck here. I just feel like I need to indulge myself with the buying of books. My desire for books are almost like exploding through this final decision, this final opening of decision on buying books. I don't care, I just want them. I also bought a lot of English books. Well, you know, I'm not a native English speaker. I found out that the translated ones from another language into English are more often using modern English, so a little bit easier for me to understand. But still, on every page, there's a lot of words that I just have to check up the real meaning. Better when it's reading books I like, such like The Brothers Karamazov. I bet there are a lot of you also fan of Dostoevsky. I was quite often selecting books in the bookshop through reading the preface. It's introduced as the best of Dostoevsky's. Of course, he's got a reputation among all the classics that he is the best at writing novels. I was curious to find out. I opened it in the bookstore and then I couldn't stop. And then I started to read other works of him. I know it's a bit exaggeration to think, wow, but it is very good. It's been quite a while since I read the Chinese version of it, but still I have the impression that it's great. I still very vaguely remember that the third brother, Alyosha, is a very good character that I really like. Also, the second brother, his struggle in his mind, there's a lot of psychology description about what's happening in his brain. He's talking to himself as if talking to another person. And that was very impressive for me because I'm just interested in human mindset. Oh, my best friend and me, whenever we were talking about books and all sorts of things together, the best game was to trace our mind from the current topic back to the original topic to see how we got from A to B to C and end up in Z. So you can see, yes, I'm always interested in how human mind works. So that's why that part of how the second brother is thinking in his mind intently really interesting for me. Big brother is kind of representing a human's flesh, and the second brother is representing the brain, the mind. The third brother is the soul. That's how I thought of the characters in it. I'm reading it in English. It was one of my favorite books, so it didn't feel that difficult, although look at those. So all the blue ones are the words and all the orange ones are expressions that I struggle with. Yeah, I stop a few pages and then check the dictionary of the new vocabulary. I found that very helpful for me to be able to get inside the story. So it is much more enjoyable experience of reading. Although yes, sometimes I have to guess, but it's not too bad. Maybe I will come back again after finishing the whole book with a better knowledge of all the new vocabulary. I also started this one. Can you guess which YouTuber I'll be inspired to read this one with? Yes, it's Emma's favorite book, and I really love Emma. She inspired me to start to do more reading again. I'm a little bit confused by not the start of the story, but the start of this particular book. The introduction, the chronology. I told you that I really love reading preface, but I don't think that's suitable for this book, at least this particular version. For me, who's not a native speaker of English, such a torture to read this guy doing the introduction using so many big words, so many weird, difficult expression. I asked my husband, who is native speaker of English, and so I quite often ask him to help me. He told me, yes, this is a person who loves big words. I think this is a bit too much. And also, look at it. This is where the story finally starts. So many pages before it. Well, for my level of English, no, I don't want to read that before the story. It almost put me off. I was really frustrated. I was thinking like, should I read this book? And then when I started the story, it's much better. Great. I finally understand much better what a person is saying in this book. This chronology, it's so much in detail. 6 pages about the author's whole life. I was trying to look for when did the author publish this book, The Phantom of the Opera. So I really looked through with notes taken, but still I couldn't find it. The only one mentioning the Phantom of the Opera is at the end, talking about the film. And I was thinking, no way, why don't you introduce the book publishing year? And so I went back to search for it. No, it's not there. Finally, I checked online. I just was determined to find out. Oh my gosh, it's written here in French. I don't mind you writing it in French, but for such an important thing, why you don't have an English translation next to it? I expect this book is the English translated version of this. Okay, English is influenced by French as a language, so that wasn't a very happy experience before starting the story. But the story is great. Of course, I love the story. But if you want me to compare with The Brother of Karamazov, no. I still think The Brother of Karamazov is way easier for me to read, to carry on the reading, to directly fall in love with the characters. I'm sorry, Emma. I do love you, and it's just no, it's not my favorite. I still love to read it. Definitely. I knew the story from the film and also from reading a much shorter version of it when I was in China. So I just think was introduced by my favorite YouTuber, and also it's a story, very short, and also it's a translated work into English, so I will start. Yes, I will carry on and finish it definitely. This. Again, introduced by Emma, but I read the Chinese version, not the English one yet. Wow, that's really impressive. Pedro Paramo, very impressive. Such a tiny book, but really showed me the possibility of writing novels in all sorts of different ways. It's really different from the classic storytelling, such like the Brother Karamazov, like Dickens or Dostoevsky's. You kind of follow one or several timeline, and you just comfortably following the one character or several to take you through the story. The Pedro Paramo, it's more like a dream, a little bit depressing dream though. It's like you are lost in a dream. Sometimes you cannot figure out who's talking in the story. Who is this story about? Sometimes even in dreams, you just followed it and didn't care whether it made sense in the dream. It's written in a way quite like a film, such like it used several times the way to change things by paying attention to what's in nature, looking at the sky or the rain. I will start the English version later. It's just that I just got out of that depressing dream of the Chinese version of it. I kind of don't want to go in it that soon. again, so I save it for later. But yes, it is very impressive. I see why the author of 100 Years of Solitude really love it, how he was inspired by it. But I still think 100 Years of Solitude is much easier to follow and much easier to understand and appreciate. Well, it's good that it's a short story. I mean, towards the end of it, I was already feeling like, when will this ever end, this dream? It's almost a nightmare. It's just maybe there are people out there who like the feeling of that. I just not used to it, maybe. Also, I just feel, oh, it's too depressive for me. I find it's hard to fall in love with the characters, to feel for those characters in it. That's possibly what the author intend to do. I still prefer stories that I get to know the characters and connect with them, almost see myself in them, fall in love with them. That's a good try, but not my favorite. Another one of my recent reading is 100 Years of Solitude. It's the Chinese version. The more I read it, the more I realize that I read it before on Kindle already. I don't know when. This is what I meant. Whenever I read books on Kindle, it's like read it in a dream or something. And so rereading it, it's almost like, wow, deja vu. But still, it's great. It's great to reread it as well. I really like it. It's full of interesting stories. Also interesting characters. Just look at that. You know what's my favorite book? Yes, that one. That's the Andersen's Fairy Tale. Why? Why Andersen's Fairy Tale is my favorite? I think Andersen's stories are more like poems. They are not just for children. They are definitely for adults as well. And when you read it as an adult, you will understand much more what he really meant, and also you will be much more inspired by it. Recently, I've been really saved by one of my favorite from Andersen's, that is The Snow Queen. Here, I have it particularly marked. This is a Chinese version of it. I have been searching this version of translation for so long. I've lost it. The one I read when I was little, possibly my mom gave it to someone else, because I don't know whether any of you out there is like me, when reading Andersen's would cry. And I cried so hard every time when I was in school. Every time when I read Andersen's, even the ones that's not tragic, I couldn't help but crying. And my mom several times was alarmed, seeing how hard I was crying over this book. And she felt there's something wrong with you and the book. She even told me, you better not read fantasy or sci-fi or fairy tale anymore. It's getting you weird. But how can I not cry to Andersen's words? I mean, I cried more because I feel him through the words, feel his love towards the whole world, that unjudging, unconditional, universal love for every little thing, and paying them equal attention, giving every tiny thing a role in his story. Let them have a say quite often. Oh, so adorable and so loving and so caring. I just feel like that is the love described in any religion, from the God of any religion, or Buddha, or any high beings. Definitely, Andersen taught me what is love through books. I read several different versions of Andersen's when I was little. This version, translated by Ye Junjian, is the best. It's the tone of the sentences and words make me feel the most comfortable. Yes, feel the love from Andersen through the words the easiest. Of course, I also love The Little Mermaid, The Shepherdess, and The Chimney Sweeper. And Chimney Sweep. Yes. Okay, sorry. I'm not native speaker of English, so if ever I read names wrong, please forgive me. Most of these books I read in Chinese, The classics were all translated version in Chinese. Every time when I read The Shepherdess and The Chimney Sweep, I quite often listen to En Ya's beautiful poetic songs, particularly this one, The Marble Hall. That's so suitable when reading Andersen's. I really recommend. Soft and gentle and poetic, and the emptiness in the song, the echoing reminds me particularly of this story, The Shepherdess and the Chimney Sweep. I really like the female characters in the stories of Andersen, at least more than the Greens. When it comes to talking about fairy tale, Andersen's fairy tale female characters are much more active in pursuit of love. The Little Mermaid, the little Gerda, they very bravely went outside into the big world. Oh yes, let me tell you what happened recently between me and the Snow Queen. When I was little, it was my favorite at that time already. It was more interesting story. I appreciate the metaphor in the story, but I didn't expect that I would be saved by this story later on in my adulthood. Recently, I was kind of like that little boy, Kai. I've been bad in a way that always focusing the bad side of things, or try to interpret things in the bad way. It's only recently I've been reminded my good days in school when I was so curious and so full of love towards the world and exploring happily through all the books, particularly classics, music, and also art, to try to learn about the world, full of expectation, thinking I was gonna to travel the world, even dreamed to be a captain, inspired by June's words, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I was so happily communicating with my friends about the books, about all sorts, sharing our love towards the world. It's a pity that that side of me was almost gone for quite a long time. This is also one of the biggest reasons why I started to buy books. I want the old days back. Yes, of course, my favorite Andersen, I got to have that. I got to have this book. Luckily, I found this translated version, which I read when I was little. I didn't expect to be so saved by the Snow Queen reading it again, particularly the part when Kai saved by his little Gerda, and he was exclaiming that, "Gerda, my dear Gerda, where have you been for such a long time, and where have I been for such a long time?" He was in the palace of the Snow Queen. He was looking around, saying, "Why it is so big, so empty, and so cold here." I was crying. I felt like the little Gerda found the little Kai inside my heart. Hopefully, they would be together forever inside me as well. I found my love for the world, for life, back again. Thanks to the Snow Queen. Thanks to all the books. That is why I started to open this channel. I want to share with all of you guys and want you guys to share with me as well our passion for life, particularly for books. Can you see? There is the different version, the Snow Queen. There. That's an English version. I sometimes read it before sleep. Its drawing is unique. I can't say that's my favorite, but it's interesting. I've bought a lot of books. I hope you're not bored of me yet. So the next one is a Chinese book another one that is helping you to understand the ancient poem. But this one is much older than any of those. This one is to help you to appreciate the Poem Sutra, which was collected by Confucius, so more than 2,300 years ago in China, during the Chunqiu period of Chinese history. It was a collection from different ways of lives. Some are soldiers, some are learned people, nobles, kings, but a lot of them are ordinary people's lives written in poem. It's great to read the people's lives more than 2,300 years ago, how they express themselves through poems. But it's not like a poet come to write their life. It's all these unknown authors. They themselves are trying to express themselves through the poems. This book is written by Xu Limin. Now she's one of my favorite authors. She tried to guide the modern people like me to understand what the Poem Sutra is really saying, and also to appreciate it, to find out why Confucius made this the top book of Confucianism. Confucianism, it is the most important culture root of Chinese culture. It started from Confucius. One of the most well-known books of Confucianism is Analects, which is not written by Confucius, but written by his students about Confucius' life, about what Confucius taught them, particularly whenever they got an inspiring answer from Confucius. Many people not even know the Poem of Sutra, which is actually the real book published by Confucius, considered the most important book of Confucius by himself. Confucius published 6 different books. None of them were purely just teaching written like a sutra, like a Bible. Some of them about history, some of them about poem, some of them about music. They were all collected by Confucius. Confucius took notes, written down his understanding for some of them, such like the Book of Change. The original version was much smaller, but it was later on Confucius and his students together wrote down much more explanation for their understanding of the book, which is the modern version of the Book of Change. These 6 different books were what Confucius actually published and wanted to pass on for Confucianism. Among them, the Sutra of Poem is considered by Confucius and also by many others the most important among the 6. This book is so great that it made me look at it in a different way, really understand that Confucius doesn't want to just teach moral teaching like a religion. He wants to use the Sutra of Poems to teach beauty education first, prior of the moral education. He thinks that if a person ever since little understand what's the real beauty of life, not just the appearance beauty, but a life like a poem, simple but nice, peaceful, loving, that sort of beauty education, he thinks is more important. And when a person understands that ever since little, he will cherish his own life much more and also cherish others' life as well, rather than just tell you what you should do, what you shouldn't. He collected a lot of very beautiful poems to let people appreciate the beauty of life. And I think that's great. I truly agree with Confucius on this. I already admire him as one of the best educator. In fact, possibly the earliest educator who teach anyone coming to his door regardless of their social background, at least in China. Before him, it was only the rich and powerful who could afford teachers for their children's education. It was ever since him, the teacher, teach everyone in China more than 2,300 years ago. Everyone could go to the teacher with very tiny pay as tuition. Through history, there's numerous stories that teachers just really think this child is a great student, eager to learn. Then the teacher will just teach him for free. It all started from Confucius. Even just for that, I already admire Confucius greatly. This even more made me feel like, wow, he was definitely before his time. Even till now, we can still be so inspired by his books. This book helped me to understand Confucius, to understand the Poem Sutra, also life. To appreciate life. It's just the right book for me right now. Among all the classics I bought, this one was the one I wasn't sure the most because I didn't really check the actual author Qu Limin. I knew nothing about her. I didn't know what to expect. It was mostly her writing. You can see that. I just marked almost every sentence through the book. I just so love it. I really appreciate how beautifully and how deeply he interpreted the Poem Sutra for me. It's not just a literature lesson, it's also a philosophy lesson and a lesson of life. The title is Poem Sutra. The more ancient, the more beautiful. Maybe I'm a snob whenever it comes to books. When I was little, I quite often tell my friends that I only read authors who's dead. And no, it's not I intend that they need to die. I just felt like my life is limited. I do want to read the good ones, the ones that's recommended, guaranteed by everyone, almost everyone, that it's good first, and then I maybe have time for other books. I recently just made a list to see how many and what books I've read before. I'm still adding more and more into it because some I just forgotten I've read it on Kindle, or I read it as a borrowed book. I put it into a Excel list. It surprised myself that there are more than 100 classics in there. Some are fairy tale, the children book, almost all of them are in Chinese. I read classics particularly because I just want to read them first, and then I have time for modern ones. Whenever it comes to which one is classics, I'm open. Such like The Catcher in the Rye, many would also think maybe that's not classics, but I think that's classics because that's recommended a lot through the years. So whenever talking about books, I just can't stop. I intended to make my first video would be talking about all the 100 something books I read, but no, every time I start one book, I just couldn't stop and end up to be too long. I possibly will make that video later. I will just first share my excitement for the new books I got with you. And even that, I haven't talked about all of them yet. Those are the ones so far I've started. And you know what? I've got more coming. I told you, this is an explosion of my desire towards books. Yes, more videos to come. I just have to stop myself now. And please do write in the comments to share your passion towards books. Maybe any of those inspired you. I will be thrilled to know. Okay, great. That's it for today. Thank you. Wish all of you enjoy your reading and see you again next time in the Secret Garden.